First of all, I'm left with the task of introducing myself. Dean Johnson was going to do so, but he's gone over, I think, to eat some good spare ribs and said go ahead and tell him who you are. My name is Tom Holman. I'm the director of the Center for Student Development. You may or may not know what that means. You may find out in your career here. I'm going to spend a few minutes hopefully just chatting with you about something I'd like to call the college experience. Being a rebel by heart, if I were a freshman at Augsburg College entering at this stage of the game, one thing I'd do is I'd get rid of those damn beanies. I'll probably have 3 or 4 upper-class, large football types in my office tomorrow to do away with me because they're getting their revenge on people that made them wear them. But nonetheless, I'd like to speak to you as adults and not as a bunch of whatevers with hats on. That's my personal opinion. Let me first of all just kind of give you a frame of reference out of which I speak to you because I think this is important, at least in my mind. I had an opportunity to talk to your parents on some of the same things I'm going to speak to you about. And as I told them, I had a terrible temptation to switch speeches, and give them yours and give you theirs and see if any insights would be had. But I won't do that. I'll give you the one that I intended for students. But I do feel like I'm an outsider many times looking in at the lives of a lot of people who are students at Augsburg College. I'd like to say first of all that I usually look in on those things as a human being. Secondly, as a psychologist. I know some of you probably wonder what a psychologist is. I get some strange responses now and then from students who think I can look at you and eye you a little bit, conjure up some things in my mind and say, aha, you know, that's what's going on. I can assure you I can't. My background as a psychologist is as a clinical psychologist and also with an attitude towards the development and the human growth of individuals. Thirdly, I have to say that I have a pretty positive attitude towards people. Even in the days that we now have and all the things we see going on in our world, I feel that man is an adaptable being. He's a surviving being and he's a positive being. And this is kind of the frame of reference out of which I operate as a person. With that in mind, I'd like to talk to you about the college experience as you may experience it, and I'm no predictor of what it's going to be, in the framework of developmental psychology. Let me start by saying what my view of your particular age group is. You're somewhere between childhood and adulthood. You're still considered adolescents by most. And by the way, when I teach a course in adolescent psychology in winter, most of the students who are juniors and seniors will admit to the fact that they still feel like they're in the category adolescents, and I think they come of this decision on their own. I'd like to divide adolescence into 2 periods, early, which is basically high school, and late, which is basically college. The one thing I think is that you enter college somehow in that category, adolescent, but you're going to leave here in a category called adult. And I think it means a lot of things. Basic to my concept or discussion of development is something I would call task, the developmental task. And let me try to explain to you what this is. Children, and they're probably the most obvious because they're the quickest, go through various stages of development during which they learn to solve various tasks. You can take a child below the age of 1.5 years. The child learns to walk successfully, and walking is a task that he has to encounter and succeed in. Between the ages of 1.5 and say 3, the child learns to talk, and that is also a task. As he goes to school, he learns or starts to learn to be a social being. He encounters other people of his own age in a controlled environment and must succeed at certain tasks. It is my belief that this process of learning tasks and encountering tasks continues through the various stages of one's life, right on up to the time of death. And in one sense, encountering death is a task of one's development. It's in this framework that I see the college experience as a stage of development in the life of the human being with its specific tasks to be encountered. There's more to it than learning from books and getting good grades, as important as that is. But I would say about half of your experience, maybe more for some of you, is going to be revolving around learning to be an adult. Let me take some time then and mention some tasks that I believe are crucial to the college experience. You may encounter some of these, you may encounter all of them. Some of you may encounter none of them because you don't want to. Initially, starting today, right now, Friday, September 5th, there's the task that I would label adjustment to college. College, as you are now starting it, is probably a world all by itself. And it's a world that's going to reflect a lot of things in the total world. And it's also going to be a time when you look at this little microcosm and experiment and learn about yourself. First of all, and I'm sure some of you have probably already encountered this when you moved into your rooms this morning, you're going to learn to live with others as you have never lived with them before. Some of you may regret it. Secondly, I think you're about to embark upon an experience of learning to be responsible for yourselves. And even if you've had parents who have been independently oriented and saying, kid, get out there and do it on your own, there's going to be more of the same, and there's going to be more responsibility than you ever imagined in your life for your own well-being. You're going to have to learn to set up your own routine. When do I go to class? When do I eat? When do I get up? When do I go to bed? All of these things you probably haven't encountered totally on your own, and nobody's there to shake you out of the sack. You're going to have to learn to study like you've never studied before. And for a relatively bright group who come from high schools where they may have put in an ounce and gotten A's, you're going to have to put in a pound and maybe end up with C's. And it's not always easiest for the brightest, by the way. Some people who are very bright coming to college experience the most difficulty in learning how to study. They have never really had to do it, and they could get by. Basic to the study will be self-discipline and the old word responsibility for self. Now, let me switch a little bit and talk about some of those things that you're going to experience over the lifespan of college. First one I'd like to mention, and it has started today, is separation from or growth away from one's role as a child in your family. For some, it's going to be hard to no longer be a child in your family. For others, it is very easy. For some of you, it's welcomed. You're away from it now, and it's a good thing. And by the way, I'm sure for some parents it's going to be very hard. For some parents, more easy, and I'm sure there are some parents who have breathed a sigh of relief and said, by God, he's at college. In either case, whether it's family or you, there are feelings about this separation, about this growth away from your role as child, which are going to have to be resolved during your college experience. And I would just throw you a quote of one of our professors a couple years ago when we were discussing this day at the end of it. He said, "You can never go home the same, nor will home ever be the same once the college experience starts." And the question in relationship to your family and this task of responsibility or taking on oneself responsibility is now, who is in control of you? And who will be in control of you in the future? Will you be, or will somebody else be? This may be a time to mention just a point that I think frequently becomes a sore point between parents and students, and that's the problem of money and who pays the bill. Very frequently, your parents have a large financial investment in your going to college. And it's my feeling that students feel more guilty about that than parents do. They think if I do anything that puts me out of line with what my parents believe or want me to believe, I'm being less than honorific to them because look at all the money they're putting into me. But it is a part of the separation and growth factor, your feelings about the financing of your education. A second task that you will be encountering is one that I would probably label learning to use one's social abilities to the best of your advantage. This is going to lead into areas of relating to other people in general as adults, relating to the opposite sex in terms of dating, marriage, and one's own sexual concept of himself. And you're going to experience social development. I'd like to stress just a couple things here. One, this development is going to be different for everyone. No two people develop in their social relations with others in the same way. I'd like to also stress this concept of sexuality. if there's anything you're going to encounter on the social level, the interactional level with others, it will be awareness of yourself as a sexual being. And I'm speaking in a broad sense of the word, that somehow your identity as a man or a woman, the roles that you will play in college, the roles that you will prepare yourself for occupationally, everything in some way will focus and reflect on one's sexualness. There's a lot of talk about sexuality in the revolution today. And I can't give you any pat answers. I won't give you any pat answers even if I had them. But it's going to involve you probably more seriously than almost anything else outside the classroom. And I would just say, learn about yourself in this area in a most concerned way. I've seen it destroy people. A third task that I would mention, and I think this is particularly relevant to a Christian liberal arts college, is that of setting up mature religious beliefs. And I emphasize mature there. Many of you stopped learning about religion and theology about the time you were confirmed. Maybe a few of you went on to high school, Sunday school, or something like this. But it's my feeling that an awful lot of people come to college with awfully immature religious beliefs and ideas. And I will say that a lot of ideas that are old and revered by many, including your parents, are being challenged. And the Christian liberal arts colleges at this stage of the game are in the forefront of challenging those beliefs. Last spring, Dr. Philip Quanbeck, who heads our religion department, was interviewed for one of the church magazines about teaching religion in a Christian liberal arts college. And Phil made the comment that it is feasible nowadays for a student to enter a Christian liberal arts college in a Christian stance and leave as a non-Christian. New concepts of yourself will be in order as far as religious beliefs are concerned. And some of these may change very drastically for you in a relatively short period of time. If your religious beliefs have been an important part of your philosophy of life, this can very well be a time when the foundations are shaking, and it can be a pretty upsetting thing. Nevertheless, I think it is one of the major tasks to confront you. A fourth task is that I would call the problem of vocation. And this is a major part of the dilemma of the college student. For one thing, it's my belief that occupationally or vocationally, you come to college with a relatively restricted knowledge of the world of jobs. You may know a doctor, a lawyer, a pastor, a nurse, a teacher. But if you were to open the dictionary of occupational titles, for example, and somebody placed it before you and said, here it is, here are 42,000 job descriptions presently available, and another 5,000 being added each year, go ahead, make a wise choice, I think you'd be pretty floored. And I would add that a lot of people who come to college with a full-blown concept of what they're going to be get turned on by something else, and a great percentage of you will change your goals occupationally. One study done a few years back at the University of Michigan followed a freshman group through their college experience to the completion of a degree. And 60% of those who completed college changed their major in college at least once. And 24% of that same group changed their major at least twice or more. I think the thing that I would like to encourage in this particular problem or task of vocational choice is to resist the urge to leap too early. A lot because of your own anxiety, and a lot because your parents get increasingly anxious as you come home and they say, "Have you chosen a major yet?" And you say, "Nope." "Well, isn't it about time you do something about that?" And you say, "Well, you know, I'm in this course and I like it, and I'm in that course and I like it." And they start to get anxious, and they'll make you anxious. And sometimes people make some pretty unwise choices to get it over with. And keep in mind that you will live with a basic choice vocationally an awfully long part of your life. And if you don't like what you're doing, it can be sheer misery. Now, what about the problem of vocation in a liberal arts college? The tradition here is that there is some kind of search for truth, and the ideal is to receive a more broadly based, more liberal education. And I think that's a very good idea. However, one still has to go out of here and eventually end up with some training for the job market. And I would throw in another quote here to you. And this is in the context that some of you are probably sitting there thinking, well, that's 4 years away. I don't have to worry about that. A good friend of mine last year said, these people, last year's freshmen, don't realize how close they are to the world of work. 4 years at the most, 3 years, 9 months for a lot of you. But it isn't very far away, and you've got to make some very wise choices in successfully accomplishing this task. The last task that I would like to discuss with you is something that I might call learning to express one's convictions and beliefs. And this, I think, is a relatively new concern for the college student. When I was a college student back in the what are now called the passive 50s, the generation in which the student kind of sat and absorbed and said nothing, there wasn't much concern about expressing your convictions and beliefs. You were to learn, and you were to spew forth in a sense, and you were to get a degree, and you were to get out. I don't think the world as we now know it will allow us the leisurely pace of not developing one's convictions and beliefs and learning to express them. I think this presupposes that you will have to form some convictions, some philosophy of life, some commitment to something. And I think you're going to be challenged in the next 4 years and beyond like you've never been challenged before about the sincerity of your convictions. All of this task orientation, and I'm not mentioning all of the ones that could be mentioned, but ones that I feel are important. But all of this centers around something called choosing one's identity. Now, identity is in some ways kind of a nasty word. It's been flung around, and I know some of us who are part of the field that got the word out into the market are wishing it never had gotten out into the market. But all of us are involved in making certain identifying marks upon ourselves that the world is going to look at us and identify us by. And I think this is the major part of the dilemma of life. The questions, who am I? Who am I going to be? Why am I? What's right and wrong for me? Are all very crucial questions that in some way or another are going to be involved in your developing your identification marks. I think it's going to be increasingly difficult because the culture and the society around you is very skeptical about you. There's a lot of countering of popular news media and what it says about you, mostly negative. And I think also the news media and some scare groups are attempting to give you an identity that isn't yours. And it's going to be your responsibility to let them know that it isn't yours. This identity, by the way, will never fit what older people, including your parents, think is the one you should have. You will turn out to be different from everyone else. You'll turn out to be different from what you expect right now. And you'll turn out to be different from what your parents expect. And all I would say is that's your right to turn out to be what you will be. You probably will not develop a stable identity until your mid-20s or even later, when all of these things get solidified. The longer we pursue education, the more complex the world becomes, the longer it takes to get prepared, the more obligations you have with such things as the draft, graduate school, marriage, etc., the longer it takes this identity to stabilize. And all I can say is that the responsibility for it will be yours. And that responsibility is going to be a big word. All of these tasks, all of this bit that I'm trying to get across to you, can cause trouble for anyone. This is a time of your life when some will make it and some won't. Some will pursue their ideals and reach them, some won't. Some won't even come close. Some of you will do all of the tasks very well. And it'll, some to at least people on the outside, appear to be a breeze. Some of you will do some of the tasks well. And built into your identity will be some disappointment. Some of you may do none of them well, at least to your satisfaction. I've heard some adults say that, you know, why bother the college freshman with thoughts like that? He's not ready to think about those things yet. There he is, bubbling, beanie on top of his head, ready to go to work, fun, play, games, etc. And along comes the old pessimistic psychologist and plants nasty thoughts in your brain. I would say that you have the best opportunity and probably the only real free time during the college years when you can examine these things in depth and take advantage of it while the time is there. Let me just mention a couple of cautions and then I'll stop. Some people very early in life become very rigid and close their mind to everything. I would say remain flexible. Become adaptable and leave yourself open to change. Secondly, a major thing involved in all of this identifying and building is learning to learn. You may not remember more than 5% of what you learn in the classroom, but you're learning to learn, and you have to do that with yourself. A third caution is that now the potential for freedom is so great when you enter college that it can lead to self-destructive rebellion. I happen to think that rebellion's a good word. Rebellion for the development of a human being is the most positive thing we have. But when that rebellion has gone beyond the scope of freeing him up to be what he is to be, it has the great potential to destroy the very person that it was helping. It's not a lecture, it's a fact. Know where to draw the line in terms of your rebellion and your growth. Last year at our faculty banquet, then Bishop James Shannon closed with a very optimistic note in his lecture to the faculty. He said that he never felt more positive about a group of people than he did about the college-age group at this time. They're asking more relevant questions, they're challenging more irrelevant things, they're placing themselves in more awareness of the world than they ever have. And he said that this was the most optimistic thing he knew. That given that challenge and given that responsibility, that this generation of students is probably going to go a long way wiping out what some other generations have done. I have to say, frankly, that I share Bishop Shannon's optimistic note. Welcome to college. Thank you. As I understand it, that's the end of this convocation, but I could be wrong. Is that right? Put on your beanies and go out into the world.